We're going to talk about my favorite thing, which is how do you build a kick-ass sales team. And we'll talk about, so we're going to talk about that, a little bit about what I see and what I've personally done, and how to avoid those. If you're ready, and how do you tell when you're ready? I get that question a lot. When are we ready to scale? And then a playbook for doing that. Ha mentioned some of this, so I'm not going to spend as much time there. What I will tell y'all to give you a little bit more is I've scaled 5 earlier growth stage companies, worked for 5 founder CEOs, hired 500 salespeople and about 200 leaders directly, and interviewed probably 1,000. And I made every single mistake out there. So I'm here to tell you that you can learn from those and get better and faster. And now I have a sales acceleration company, and what we do is help founders turn their dreams into reality by accelerating your sales and eliminating your sales acceleration risk. So let's get to it. Scaling. All you need is Steph Curry. That's it. All right, we're out. No, but what I do want to talk today is about winning. And one of the things that I love to study is why people win, why companies win, why people win, because I don't think that you always have to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of things that people do that you can apply yourself. And I first started studying Steph Curry years ago. I went to UNC Chapel Hill, so I'm a huge basketball fan, not a huge Hurricane fan, and unfortunately that's going to be happening this weekend. But and so when he was at Davidson and they got to the Elite Eight, I was like, hey, what's going on there? Davidson's a very small school in North Carolina, and doesn't get to the big dance that often, so it was exciting to see. And here was this guy that was playing and then was drafted, so I was really interested in him. And a couple of years ago, a video came out called "Success Is Not an Accident." How many of y'all have seen that? Nobody. Okay, great. Then nobody knows my story. Perfect. Trying to make Doug a little proud here. I did actually have a story. I was like, yes, I have a story. When Steph was originally, so Success Is Not an Accident is about when Steph was originally drafted, and he was invited to Kobe Bryant was having his inaugural Nike skills camp, and so he invites 30 up-and-coming players. Steph was probably the last one to slide in. And a Nike commentator named Alan Stein was observing all this. So he was there helping out with the camp, and he starts telling this story about seeing Steph. And he said, after that camp, those 3 days, I knew he was going to be an NBA superstar. And here's how I knew. Nobody had a more dedicated work ethic and had created habits like this guy. First day of camp, people are supposed to show up 8 o'clock. He's on the floor at 7:30. Pounding the baskets, draining balls. By the time everyone walks in, they got their hoodies on, they're listening to their music, their flip-flops. He's drenched in sweat. And then the whole time, that's all he did, his work ethic. He practiced his footwork. He practiced his shots. He said the coaches didn't even have to tell him what he was doing wrong. He knew it already. He knew it before they knew it. And he was just so meticulous and really understanding what it was going to take to be great and the habits that he needed to create. And he said, I took a step back and I thought, you know what? This is proof that success is not an accident. Success is a choice. You choose to create habits that you're doing every day and create a framework that is going to be successful. And it made him realize, are the habits that I have today on par for my dreams of tomorrow? And I think about that way when I think about building a sales organization. And am I helping people, and are we creating habits that are going to help build that foundation and that dream and that revenue of tomorrow? So I want you to put on your coach's hat for the next few minutes, because we're going to talk about some of the pitfalls that people fall into, and then how you can build that playbook to continue to scale yourself. The first and most common thing, and I've done it myself, is basically taking a shotgun approach instead of a sniper approach to customer acquisition. So you've got a product, you know who it fits for, and you're going after that target market. Stay on that path instead of becoming, well, wait, we talked to this person, and if we just tweak this one thing, then they'll be a customer. And wait, if we tweak this one thing, they'll be a customer. And before you know it, everyone's a customer. And you haven't really solidified yourself in any market. It's the same way if you were a coach and you were drafting to the Warriors. The Warriors have a very specific playbook that they run. They have a very specific strategy. And so they are going to draft players that are a fit because they want to get this one player in the draft. Does that make sense? All right. I've done that where we've just been, let's just try and get anyone we can. It works for your first 10. After that, it's really tough to really scale that. Thinking about customer acquisition, you want to continue to sign folks, but also have a plan for how you're going to make your customers successful and retain them. You don't want to be bringing people on and have them going out the back door at the same time. And there's plenty of people that do that because for a while, and in some stages, it is all about revenue growth. Let's just throw people in top line revenue. But the problem is that if you are losing it out the back door, then that's obviously a much bigger expense to you. And long term, you don't have that revenue. I learned this the hard way at Zenefits. When I came on board, we had some early success in enterprise, and what we considered enterprise was companies over 100 people. So we were moving up into the Workday space. And we said, we're building out this SDR team. I inherited a team of 20. We're going to build this SDR team to 250 in small business, and we're going to go after this market. One thing that we found, and we found it pretty quickly, is that at that level, we didn't have product market fit. Once we started getting into 120, 150 employees, there were a lot of things Workday did that we actually didn't do. And so we were only acquiring about 10% of those customers versus our close rate was more like 30%, and we were losing half of them. It's a very expensive way to find out that you don't have a fit. If we would have fixed some of that beforehand, we would have been in a different place. Winning coaches have a playbook. So back to the playbook. They have a strategy, and they think about, first of all, I'm going to draft this player because they're going to fit my strategy. But then they don't say, hey, glad you're on the team. Come on in, let's high five. I'm just going to sit over here on the sidelines. Go out there, do your thing. Good luck. But yet, a lot of times we hire salespeople and we think, okay, they've sold before, so I'm going to bring them in. I'll train them on my product for a day, and then they'll go out and they'll be ready to go. Or, I've got these 10 now, and they can just figure it out. The reality is that doesn't happen, and there's a couple reasons why that can have a negative impact. First of all, you're hiring people that usually haven't created a playbook before. They've been running someone else's playbook. So when they walk into a space and there's not that for them, then they're trying, but now you've got 10, 20 people all doing their own thing. They're trying to apply a playbook that works somewhere else, and it may not be the right one for you. And then you don't have the right data to tell you what's working. And then the second thing that happens from that is they potentially are not being successful. So their productivity is dropping. That comes with a drop in morale. They're making emotional decisions because it is about, I just need to get a deal. If we could only do this, let's bring this one customer on. And now we're back to the situation we talked about in number one. So really making sure that you've got a defined process in place and a playbook that your team is going to run will help you scale and will help everybody understand what success looks like. With that, it is the process. So how are you going to bring your customer on board? What you don't want to do is hire someone and have them run all parts of that process. There's a reason why in Saas and in enterprise, the sales process is broken down into roles. Because if you have one person that's supposed to be doing outbound lead gen and trying to get meetings with folks and then trying to step them through, a demonstration, and then potentially if you have a pilot or you're running a proof of concept and then they're trying to onboard that person, there's only so many hours in the day. That's the one thing nobody has figured out. I haven't seen any startup that's figured out how to give us more hours. That would be helpful for everyone. But that's where you really want to make sure that how can you break that down? If you've defined that process, then if you can break it out around people, you actually get more going through that pipeline, and therefore you've got more productivity. But it's easy to think, oh, I don't want to hire that. Let me just get this one person going, but yet you're not seeing that traction. Last but not least, we're not all Steph Curry. I wish we could be, but most people actually need coaching. And even Steph Curry still obviously practices and has a coach that coaches him. You can hire the right person. You can give them a playbook. You can get them pointed in the right direction and tell them how to get success. But people still need to develop. They need to learn. And in fact, Corporate Executive Board did a study a few years ago that said the number one thing that had the biggest difference in sales results and performance was the hours that the leader spent coaching or somebody spent coaching that rep. When that rep was coached for 2 or more hours, so actually got one-on-one time, the those companies were usually over 100%. Yet, it is the thing that people do the least of. And so making sure that you're thinking about, especially in a scaling situation, you're going to be bringing folks in, they need that coaching. So a lot of times I'll see where folks are, I'm adding a bunch of people, and I'll just grow people from internally. These people have never coached before. And then you've just got sort of it becomes sort of a little bit of a shit show, to be honest. Okay, so how do you know if you're ready to scale? When I sit down with companies, and a lot of times I do talk to folks that are more in seed, and they've maybe got a couple of customers, and they're saying, okay, I'm ready, I need to go out and hire a team. I'll say, whoa, let's take a step back. Because a lot of times they actually do need a lot of what Whitney was talking about, and they need somebody that's really like, let's help you get your first 10. Let's work on your pitch and what you're doing, and let's get some of these things in place. Once you found that you have a product market fit, but you've got a dozen or more customers, and depending on your average deal size, you maybe need 100 customers. You've got a few people selling. They're starting to get some consistent results. You probably need to get somebody managing them because it may be you or someone else. And you've got a process generally laid out. It may not be the right one. It might need to be refined, but you've at least figured some of that out. Then that's probably when you're ready. Typically, we work with companies that are somewhere in Series A. Sometimes B, if that's really their growth round, depending on if it's a pretty engineering intensive company. But that's when they're, okay, but they've got a few of these, and this is the checklist we look at. And then we talk about how they're going to progress and some of the goals. So, we want to think about making sure that, a lot of times companies will say, okay, I've got 2 people, I need to go out and hire an EVP of sales. And I'm like, whoa, let's take a step back. Let's get all of your foundation in place. So if you looked at that list and you thought, okay, I'm close on some of these, I've got some of these, coming, that's a good way for you to think about and then look at, what intends to happen. Because in your ramp, you're getting a lot of your framework in place, and even as you scale, you'll start to get some of that in place. But as you scale, you're either going after a very specific target market that is pretty deep, or in some cases, you're going after a market that's deep, but you're starting to test, market 2 and market 3 on the side. And you'll want to make sure that you have a framework to do that. Any questions so far? Yes?
What are those acronyms? ICP, ACV?
Oh, sorry. ICP. See, I'm a product. Doug would be here slapping me. I'm doing the Silicon Valley thing. ICP is your ideal customer profile. So who have you determined is your customer? And then ACV is your average contract value, your average deal size. Do I have any other acronyms up there? Yes.
If coaching can make such a big difference in the output of productivity, then why is it something that most people do?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, so I'll get into this in a little bit because we'll talk about that's one of the steps. Oh, I'm sorry, you're right. He said, if coaching makes such a big difference in people's output, why is it something that people tend to ignore? What I generally see, especially in the scaling, is that there is a lot of, I know Whitney talked about earlier that sales is part, sales but project management. There's a lot of project management that goes into it too. And what I see happen is that a lot of times people don't build their sales ops organization fast enough to actually do the project management part. And so the managers that should be coaching end up taking on doing a lot of that, where they're going and they're building some of that, the process and the pitch deck, and they're pulling reports, and they're trying to keep Salesforce updated, and then they're doing things that maybe a sales ops function would do now. And in some cases, it's actually, so I see that a lot, where it comes down to a time thing. Second, it's just not prioritized, and people don't spend as much because you really have to prioritize it and make it. And third, it's not ingrained in the culture from day one.
Is coaching mostly for like your inside sales, transactional market, or also field sales?
All, every role.
Typically, older reps do not respond to coaching, what I would presume. But
it's a different, so just like when you're pitching to an investor versus a customer, you're using a different talk track and a different story, same thing. So when you're coaching a more tenured rep, there's still things that they want to do. To me, those conversations are very much about, we defined what they want to achieve, and we're talking about how they're doing against that, and then we're talking about things that I can do to remove those obstacles, brainstorming on ways they could get further. The newer folks, it is about just getting those fundamentals in place and coaching around that. So you're coaching different things. The worst thing you can do is leave your A players alone. You should be spending more time with your A players, second B players. Your C players, to me, get, here's your hour, here's the 3 things I want you to do. This is what you're doing. When I'm going to come back next week, I want to see this, and we're going. They need to earn your time. But so many people do the reverse. They spend a ton of time with their people that aren't really performing. They spend some time with the people in the middle because they think they're doing okay, and not that much my top people have it. And the reality is, and if you are familiar with Gallup and Strength Finders, you're going to keep your top folks engaged a lot longer. But again, it's a different conversation.
How do you prepare team members to become mentors?
Great question. So I've done a few things. I'm happy, be great if other people have done things. At organizations where we're scaling, I purposely put in mentor programs. So at LivingSocial, we had an MDC, so people had to apply. And so a team lead is that kind of role too. I like to make it that there's things that people have to do, and I'll talk about this a little more in Career Path in just a minute, that they have to do to be qualified for it. And then they have to apply. I like people to have to write out why, they have to go in front of it, so that they know it's really serious. And then we put them through a program where we teach them. They get to, there's some kind of workshop each week, but they actually start sitting in on interviews, they start learning methodology, they're paired up with a manager that is their coach, and we actually have structured programs so that it's serious. Because I think a lot of people, the challenge in sales, if you don't have a career path where there's other roles, is that people want to this is just human nature, right? We want the next thing. What's the next thing? I want the next thing. And a lot of times we don't think about, oh wait, do I really want that? It's like, the wedding, or not, and then you're in the marriage, right? Oh, I think that's going to be great. And then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, I don't like that half my pay is actually dictated by my team. I don't have control over that. I don't want to sit around and coach people for 50% of my time. I just wanted this title. And so really trying to weed those folks out, but also have another career path for those people, because most of the time my best salespeople would be horrible coaches, because that's not their skill set and it's not what they want to do. Is that helpful? Okay. So let's talk about your playbook. So now you guys are a coach, you're building your team, right? Your superstar team. First, I've got a little question for you. You've got 2 teams to choose from. They came in a lineup. Are you choosing team 1 or are you choosing team 2? Raise your hand if you're going with team 1. So you can see their pick. So these are 2 teams. You want to think about usually people that are picked higher are better skilled, or at least they had a better college basketball career. Okay, so team 1, show of hands, don't be shy. Okay, good. Got some team 1s, team 2. Some people are undecided. All right, team 2. Okay, if you're team 2, you're like, there is a trick to this. I'm going to go with the trick. I should make this one a little harder. My point here is that talent isn't everything. So again, a lot of times I hear, oh, but I've got this rock solid. I'll use a client that I have right now. They're in the fintech space. They're selling to foundations and endowments. They hired a guy right before I came on board. He was an opportunistic hire who was selling into that space. The biggest challenge they have is this guy has been selling in this space for very archaic companies for a long time. He just asked me if he could install Outlook because he doesn't want to use Google Mail. So it's very tough for him to get kind of on board with a very early stage startup. And so, so I think sometimes people think if I just bring this person that knows this, then all my problems will be solved because they'll be going after it. And the reality is you do need talent, and you need to bring the right talent. You need to make sure there is a combination of experience and culture fit. But you also want to make sure that you have a playbook in place and that you've defined what success looks like. You've got a sales model and plan. You've given them tools and support, and you've got somebody that is coaching them. Because this is the thing. When it all comes down to it, sales is a people business, but it's built on science. You have to use data. Good sales leaders use data to run that business, but you still are asking people your people are driving that business. And keeping them motivated, giving them the tools they need. There is a lot that goes into that, especially because, again, half their compensation is coming from their success. So they want to know, they have to have this foundation to help them succeed. So you guys are coaches, you're building your team. First, you need your playbook. Now, this might be a little bit of an eyesore. So if it makes you feel overwhelmed, don't be, because there are people like me or your head of sales that'll help you put it in place. But the reason that I have this is because what happens a lot of times is, and I did this when I was early stage in companies, or I'll talk to people, they're like, oh yeah, well, we've got a comp plan, and we think we know our target market, and we've got some tools, so we're good to go. I'm like, okay, but wait a minute. There are some pieces that need to go in place. And we just hired some people, and now we've got them going. And the reality is, it's not just pieces of this, but if you're going to scale, you need to think about all of this, because it all fits together in a package that's going to help your team be successful. There's no way to get to predictable revenue without being very clear about, here's the person that's buying from us, and here's the accounts that you're going to have. Here's the team we need, and how their quotas are going to roll up to our plan, and how we're going to pay them. And before that, you need a sales model and a customer life cycle that shows you that. Here's how we're going to position. Here's the process we're going to use. And by the way, that's coordinated with our technology and our CRM and any other tech stack that we're using. And everyone's using the same thing and understands how we're using it. Here's how we're going to hire those folks that are going to fit in those roles, how we're going to onboard them and make them successful, and how we're going to measure that it's working. So have a plan. Right now, y'all are starting with pieces of this, and you should be. That's where you should be. But we're talking about once you get to scaling, you'll have to start building more of that out. Then you'll want to know, okay, what are my stats? So part of what you should be doing right now in your seed stages, since I think the majority of you, except for one, were seed, is you want to start getting some of that consistent repetition. So understanding, as you start to get better, how are we pricing your product? So what do you think your average deal size should be? Because when it comes down to it, sales is actually pretty simple. There's 3 main things that goes into it, and then there's, then it starts to get a little more complicated from there. But it's, when you're driving revenue, it's what's the cost, your average deal size. So every time you sell something, what are you making? How many of those are you selling? So how many per person are they selling? And how many people do you have selling them? And then from there, yes.
Sorry, so I know you're mostly focused on later stage, but for those of us who are very early stage, just founders involved, be curious any thoughts you have about timing for bringing in, starting that sales team.
Yeah, so good question, and definitely Whitney can chime in here too. I think that I agree with her. I would recommend that the founders do the first 10 sales, because it's going to help you understand, it's going to help you build your story, it's going to help you understand really where your product is fitting, and kind of get past the friends and family too, because you're going to have your investors and other folks coming with people. At that point, once you've figured out, okay, it seems to be resonating here, and we know we've got this runway, we've got a bunch of people, and you're also getting to the point where you're bottlenecked. A lot of times I see that now you've got interest coming in and you don't have time to follow up on it, then that's when you can bring in someone. If you can, I like to bring in 2 people at one time, only because then you don't sit there and wonder, is it the person or is it the product? Sometimes I know that's hard with your very first person, so you might get your first person first, get that going, and then your next 2. But that's typically when I see you start to become the bottleneck, and you've got enough to know this is what we should be doing in our product fitting, and we have a decent pricing.
I was just going to jump in here. I was going to say, one of the first hires I like to make is actually an SDR function, because if as executives, if you haven't managed teams before, I use my SDR as my sales assistant, because they can take off a lot of the burden of the technical activities. And at the same time, it teaches you how to be a manager and train on the sales process. And it can help you manage a larger workload. And then that SDR, when they're there, they can either move into an AE position eventually and bring in another SDR, and they can help you train, or they can help you train the AE as well. because they've been in a supportive role for a few. So it's a really good first cheap hire that, like, if you make mistakes, it's not a high cost hire, as well as it's typically not a high salary. Just I like that hire and then pulling it.
No, it's a great point.
What do you think, Stuart?
Sales development representative.
Yeah. They do demand gen.
Yep. And I have a sales model that if y'all are interested, I can send it to you, and it's pretty easy for you to plug in, and it gives you unit economics on one person, but then on the second page, you can start plugging in what a team would look like. But it also helps you see as you're plugging in those, what's your deal size, what's your ramp, if you do marketing, you can put that in. It helps you see, I know these things, I don't know these things, and these are the things I probably need to start understanding better. So happy to share that with anyone. So as you get that, though, and you think about, okay, here's what this would look like, let's make sure that we're focused, then that is really a process of target market. And the way Whitney actually was describing do it with a customer is a lot of times what I end up doing is sitting down with people. Like, let's just look at who you've talked to. I would recommend earlier than later, get a CRM. When your dreams turn into reality, you're going to end up getting Salesforce anyway, so I usually recommend to people to just start with Salesforce. And sorry, I love HubSpot actually as a marketing tool, but you end up having to transition. So, but the more you can start putting things in there, because you can start seeing what's happening, even your own conversations, you'll be able to go back and look and say, okay, when we talk to people, it turned out there usually tends to be some kind of commonality, whether it's by a segment or a vertical, by geography, by maybe the size of company, but there tends to be something that you can say, okay, let's start here. And then just be really disciplined about going after that market first and learning. It's hard because you're going to have people, and here's what happens when you start to scale. Again, you're going to hire salespeople. They're very excited. They really want to help out. They start coming to you with ideas, right? Like, I was talking to so-and-so, and if we could use this product to do this, it would be so cool. And I was over here. And so, the more you can keep them focused on, hey, here's who we're going after and why, and that goes back to your story about keeping people, the better off you'll be. But you can really start getting traction in one market. When you're an A and you're going for B, that's what you're going to want to show, right? And if you're going to start looking at some other markets, I would recommend getting 1 or 2 reps on the side and having them don't disrupt your team that's actually, you need to show productivity and traction with. Was that a question? Okay. Third, so I won't spend as much time on the next 2 slides because I think Doug did a great job covering it, but the one thing I'll say is differentiate. Know what makes you different. So we talked about Box, and yep, Dropbox does the same thing. But what you're going to do after you start asking questions and you start finding out more from them is you're going to ask, you're going to learn how to ask a couple questions that the answer that they have is going to be how you talk about your differentiation. So when you sit down, think about something that you do, and it may be that you're, I would recommend that it isn't that you're cheaper. Try and find something that you're more efficient, you're faster, you're easier, you save more time, you actually have 2 or 3 things that make their life better. Maybe you do make them more money, but usually it does come down to money and time. That's what your customers, that's what they lay awake at night. They don't lay awake thinking about features on products. And if I only had this one, feature, they lay awake saying, how can I drive more revenue? How can I save more time? How can I get more time? And so, if you can think about tying it back to that, but how are you doing that differently than your customer? So you can go back into your story of what questions are you asking that'll help you tell that story? And then align that with your value prop. So again, on the feature side, have another example from Zenefits, but when I walked in, team of 20 SDRs, and I started sitting down, everybody was doing something different, but a lot of what we were doing was, first of all, and this goes back to knowing your buyer, we were calling HR, and we were talking about that we have a free automation tool that automates all their HR tasks. Well, the challenge was we were setting a lot of appointments, but those appointments weren't converting into really opportunities. And so I started looking, who's signing these contracts? And the reality is that the CFO is signing the contract, or the COO, because really what we were is insurance, right? I mean, we had this software around it that made onboarding and all these other things easier, but the reality is we made money on insurance. That's what we were selling at the end of the day, and the person that made the decision on insurance is the CFO. So it said, we're not doing this anymore. We're not calling and talking to the person that doesn't have any buying power, and we're not going to talk about features. We're going to call the CFO, because the thing that we actually do that makes their life better is we're going to reduce their benefit spend by 3 to 5%. Also, ACA had just come out. We had a whole product that automated that. It was saving them thousands of dollars. We started using that, getting in the door, and all of a sudden we had, we like tripled the opportunity pipeline of qualified opportunities. But so one of the things to think about is make sure as you're scaling your team that you really know who your buyer is, and that you've got that value statement to go after that. It doesn't mean that you don't have to. We still had to call into HR sometimes that we got kicked back down, and we had to use them as our champion, but we had a different talk track for that, because we knew that, and we did have some different benefits for them, but ultimately they had to bring us to the right person for us to sell. So think about that, because you don't want to waste your time to not getting to that right person. And now you're getting to your process. So a process involves, what are the steps that we have to take? They generally look like something like this, and then closed. I like to define, especially once you get to mid-market and enterprise, what's the criteria that has to happen at every step. I mean, just as simple as, we need to make sure they're qualified. We need to, do you need a mutual plan? Do you need to, what are the things that you know about your product that you want to make sure that happen? And then what are the things that you need to know about their organization to move them forward? And if you map that out and you're very clear, and then you match that back to Salesforce, it makes it so much easier as you grow your team, because everybody's doing the same thing. You're getting consistent data. You don't have a situation where Salesforce has actually become this wild and woolly, like people only use it when they're entering a deal. You actually get a lot of data that's going to help you make better decisions and move those deals forward. And then as your coaches are coaching, they can look and see what's happening too. Now you've got to your people. Now notice we didn't hire people first. See how I did that? A lot of times it's like, let me go hire some people. Then we're going to figure all this stuff out. The reality is you actually have to think through that stuff, because when you're bringing your people on board, you need to be able to talk to them about what their quotas are. So you're going to define those roles in that process. First we've got, in order to get sales qualified leads in the door, in a lot of cases you are hiring an SDR. And those people are going out and finding those and qualifying them, and then setting those initial discovery meetings for your rep. Or for you in some cases. So you want to think about what those roles are, and then align them to what is their comp, what is their quota, what expectations do I have of them? This is really important, and I'm going to talk more about that on the next page. And then the staffing plan, how many do I need? What's the profile? And then what is the process to hire? So in 3 organizations, I've had to hire over 200 people plus in 6 months, which is tough, and make sure that you still get people and still maintain productivity. And one thing that we did at LivingSocial that I've carried on, that I'll share with you guys if you're in a position, this will work for any role, by the way, if you're hiring engineers and you got to hire 6 or whatever, is we called them super sessions, but think about them like hiring blocks. Because one of the biggest challenges, and you guys tell me if you face this too, is you usually have lined up, like, here's the 3 or 4 people that need to interview this role, right? But then trying to coordinate everyone's calendar. So that person initially comes in and talks to someone, and then you're trying to get them back in, and you're trying to coordinate other people's calendars, and then it can be like 2 or 3 weeks to try and talk to everybody. But we're in a really tough hiring market. So by that time, you potentially lose that person. So what we did is we looked at, okay, who are the people that need to hire? We are going to do hiring. So for example, every Tuesday and Thursday morning. Everybody blocks their calendar that's on that hiring grid, that's in that hiring plan. And we had a process, they're talking to this person first about culture, and then they've got manager 1 interview that's on behavior, manager 2 that's on skills, and then this last interview that's role play. And we just would put people through that. We would do like 8 people in a day. The great thing is that we were efficient. We could book people in. We met at the end of the day and went through and made decisions. And the other benefit is those people see each other. So it feels competitive. Like to them, it feels like, wait, a lot of people want to work here. Wait, I want this job. I want to work here. I don't even know if I want to work here, but now I want to work here. All these people want to work here. But it makes your life so much easier. And you know what? If you don't have that many interviews that day, or you don't, for you guys, depending on where you are, maybe you're only doing 2 or 3 a week. But if you don't end up having 3 interviews that week, then great, you get the time back. But it really makes it so much easier for whoever is helping you recruit to schedule that. So just a quick tip on that. Defining success. So this is where I get to performance expectations. Gallup in the bottom of that poll, the biggest thing that you need to define for people is what do you need to do to be successful? And guess what? For salespeople, it is not quota. Everyone feels like I told them how much they need to sell. I don't understand why they're not doing it. The reason they're not doing it is because they need to understand what those activities are that will help them do that. So, and this is something when you're building your sales model, when I work with companies, what we back into is how many leads they ultimately need and how many of those are going to convert to ops and over what time period. But we back that down into a per rep basis so we can tell the rep, hey, every month, this is down to month and week, you need to be generating, you need to be holding this many discovery calls. And we talk about how many they're getting from the SDR and how many they're doing themselves. And that should be generating this much new pipeline for you. And you need to be moving this much pipeline to your proposal closing stages. But you're giving them guidelines. And it's really important when people are first getting started because in a lot of cases, if your sales cycle is 3 or 6 months, they're not going to see anything. So you want them to know, like, great, I'm doing the right things, I'm on track, and that you're measuring those things. But they need a way, and you need to be communicating that to them. And then on top of that, as you scale, really giving people a career path. It doesn't have to be super complicated, but what'll happen is people in 3 to 6 months start asking you, what's next? What do I got next? And again, if you only have a manager role, then everybody wants to be a manager. And so, you can see some examples of things that we put in place. I like to do I really like to put onus back on people. I'm very big on being transparent, but responsibility driven back to the person. So instead of it being it's kind of a secret. Oh, that person got promoted. Why did they get promoted? I like to make it open to all. Here's what you need to do. There's a results component. I usually do it in a rolling time frame. So you either need to sell this much or be at this much percentage in a rolling 9 months or whatever it is. And that there's another set of criteria potentially depending on the role that they have to hit and that they can go and get those things checked off. And once you've hit that, then you're eligible to interview for that role, or in some cases, maybe you just promote them because it's kind of a title. You can do a lot of things with perks too, especially in sales. One of the things we did at Zenefits with our SDRs that people really loved, and I couldn't believe it, is that when they got to SDR2, they got a different flag that showed at the top, because we had a big floor, that they were actually an SDR2 and a hoodie that differentiated them, and it was the freaking driver. Like everybody wanted the hoodie and the differentiator to show I am not just a standard person, I am now this person. So just getting to ask, but we did a big survey and we asked people what would motivate them. And so, as you scale, thinking about that and how you can, but it was based on their own. Everybody had the same framework, everybody had the same chance, and that's how they got there. And now back to the coaching. So onboarding programs, I cannot talk about how important they are. When you've got your first couple reps, it is just going to be them learning from you. But if you're going to go out and hire 10 reps, you really need to think about what do they need to learn. They're not going to learn it all in 1 week. How many of you have sat in a 1-hour training program and walked out like, that completely changed my life? I'm implementing all that, right? Because the reality is habits. Going back to habits with stuff, it takes time. And so, a lot of the onboarding programs, if we're implementing for our client, we do them over 6 weeks. And we take a stage of the sales cycle and implement it every week. So we spend 1 week on prospecting. Doesn't mean they're not doing other stuff, but we do prospecting in a skill workshop. They record themselves. They do peer role plays. There's group interaction. They take a test. Like there is a whole thing. So that at the end of that week, they better, if you walk up to them and wake them up at 3 a.m, they better be able to spit out that value statement. But that's what it takes. Because if we just sit up for an hour and talked about prospecting and then went away, like everybody's doing their own thing. So really think about investing in that if you're going to scale, because it does pay back in dividends, and then continuing to provide an environment and a framework where you are, and it is required that your managers as you hire them are coaching. And then last but not least, measure what matters. As you start getting this and you're putting more in your pipeline, you're going to realize like either we need some more at the top of the funnel because that is the easiest thing to control, or we're starting to get blocked. We're having a ton of discovery calls, but things aren't moving on to demo. Why is that? And you're going to want to dig in and then come back. As you get bigger teams, it's going to be harder to move. So I have a rule of 3. Don't roll out more than 3 things in a quarter to a team. They cannot absorb it. which means that you kind of have to manage with your marketing team and your ops team and everyone else to really pick what's most important and what can you do behind the scenes versus really putting in front that's going to take people's behavior changing. All right, so now y'all all have the fundamentals down, right? You're ready to go. But it really does come down to the fundamentals, and those are some of the fundamentals. It does start to be, as you're scaling people, getting all those tools in place, and then it is a people business, and making sure that you are giving them a path and that you're coaching them. And if you're doing that, then you'll have the habits that are going to turn your dreams into your reality. So with that, any other questions? Yes.
So we have time for 2 questions.
I was going to say, and I
Two
think
questions.
I'm over, as I just told Ha, I will be for you.
A couple of related questions. First, what are your thoughts on outsourced or commission-based sales teams or virtual sales teams? And then using a robust method like that to onboard virtual or outsourced or commission-based salespeople?
Yeah, so outsourced teams. I think it depends on the situation that you're using them. I really like them actually for if you're testing another market and you don't want to disturb your current team, as long as you can get comfortable that you can give them the right, you can be really tight with here's our target audience and that you've got some controls over that. Because if you get the right company, then they can start figuring that out for you and they can give you some early data. So I like it for that. If for things that are shorter sales cycle, I think that's usually easier to pick up. Commission-based only, a lot of that comes down to the management. Sometimes those tactics are different. So those folks are, that can be a little more of a hard sell, they'll always be selling. But so as long as you can kind of manage that, but I do think that there's room for that.
So Liz Wiseman wrote a book called Rookie Smarts, and it's all about people that don't know what they're doing but who are effective, often have better results. Does that work in sales?
It can, to an extent. I think about that in sales, and off the top of my head is people that are naturally engaging and naturally curious and asking questions. So when I'm hiring, I don't necessarily feel like people have to have industry experience unless you're in an industry that is very small or you're selling semiconductors or. But people that want to ask a lot of questions, that are smart and can get to know that, I think that can work. There is a method, though, as you scale, that there are some things you have to do. Like people, you have to use Salesforce. You have to do some things that are consistent if you're going to have consistent revenue. But the method and the manner which people do them, I think can be different.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.